All right, welcome back, everybody. I am excited to talk about, well, I'm excited to talk about it. Why not? In-state tuition, woohoo! Mostly I'm excited to welcome my colleague, Tara Piantanita Kelly, to the show. Hi, Tara.
Hi.
Hi. So Tara is a former financial aid officer at Menlo College and Rochester Institute of Technology, among others. And as I mentioned, she works here with me at College Coach. All right, Tara, first question for you is, how do you qualify for in-state? Seems pretty straightforward to me. If you
Right.
live in a state, you qualify, right?
Super straightforward, right? Not straightforward. so, so the short answer is yes. If the student lives in the state, they should qualify for in-state tuition. But what if it's a dependent undergraduate student and their parents live out of state, or one parent lives out of state,
Yes.
or if their parent is one parent or the other is active duty military, so there's lots of nuances there, and the state requirements, I mean, each state gets to essentially write their own requirements. So if you're looking or thinking about an out of state public school, you'll want to go onto the school's website and just do a little searching,
Right.
in-state residency requirements for in-state tuition, and see what that particular state requires, because they just are all over the place as far as what they require.
Right. Okay. So first place to go is to the school's website. And then here is a question that I would guess, I know I get it a lot, so I can only imagine, given that you are on the finance side of things and the expert in that area. And I always want to say, wouldn't that be like problematic or difficult? But the idea that you go to a school freshman year, you live there for the year, and now suddenly you're a resident of the state and you qualify for in-state tuition. What are the
Right.
chances that that happens?
Almost none.
Yeah.
So because I mean, if you think about it this way, in-state public schools, they offer essentially a big discount to their in-state residents, right? And their
Right.
out-of-state residents, they pay a premium.
Mhm.
So they're not going to make it super easy for someone to qualify for that in-state rate. Most of the states, when they are writing these requirements, they have a few things that they look at, like um, if the student is living in the state, why are they living in the state? If
Mhm.
they're only living in the state to go to college, that doesn't qualify.
Right.
Also, how long have they lived in the state? Did they just move there, 2 weeks before the school started? Many states have a duration requirement, typically 12 months, but it doesn't have to be. That the student has to be living in that state, essentially as a state resident, for up to a year or even more before school starts. So there's that duration period. And then there's also a proof of residency. Can they prove that they are a state resident? Do they have that state's driver's license? Do
Mhm.
they, have they registered to vote in that state? So no, they don't typically make it easy for dependent undergraduate students to poof get in-state residency and in-state tuition, starting their sophomore year. It just generally does not work that way.
Right. And one thing I've heard, and again, I'm on the show, I say, if I've said it 10 times, I've said it a million times, is the whole like, I've heard that, but we do get parents who maybe say, we were thinking, she doesn't want to live in the dorms, or after freshman year, she's not going to live in the dorms. So we were going to rent or even buy an apartment near to campus, and will not only will we be covering what she would have to do, she's going to have a living situation covered, but also we're establishing residency. And I always think, I'm not sure that's going to do it. So in this situation where maybe you purchase a house or an apartment, that generally isn't going to be enough either, is it?
Right, right. No, just owning property in a state does not make that your state of residency. They look at domicile. Where do you actually reside?
Mhm.
That, and whether you own property, and you can own property in 49 different states.
Right,
Doesn't mean you're a resident of that state, even if
right.
your kid is living in the property there. So no, just that strategy alone does not work for in-state residency purposes either.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right, we've established what doesn't work. You did mention, what if a student has parents who live in different states? Any particular advice beyond just going to the website, or is that
Right.
probably it?
Well, definitely go to the website,
Mhm.
because again, different states can have different rules. But let's say, for instance, one state can say, Any parent who lists the dependent undergraduate student as a dependent on their taxes, the
Mhm.
state that that parent lives in, the student can also is technically a resident of that state because the parent claimed them on their taxes. Check that out. That might be, for the state that you're looking at, that might work.
Mhm.
If instead the other parent who doesn't claim them on their taxes says, I provide more than 50% of that student's support, so then the student might be able to get in-state residency, requirements, or tuition at that parent state, maybe. you know
Right.
there's it's just kind of all of it. If this, for the student or for the parent who is considered the custodial parent for that student, the state that they live in, the student might get in-state tuition rates in that state. So it varies widely. Definitely check the school, but those are some of the common ways that students might qualify.
Okay. So let's shift gears slightly. So we've kind of established there are different ways in which you might be considered a resident. But what if you know for sure, I'm not going to be considered a resident, I'm definitely out of state? Will you always for sure pay out of state rates, or are there times where you might actually be able to get the in-state tuition, even though you are not a state resident?
Yeah, there are some options. There's something called a tuition reciprocity agreement,
Mhm.
that some states, I can go over that in a little bit. So tuition, check to see if your state belongs to one of the tuition reciprocity agreements. There are also some border waivers. Some states offer, contiguous states or even contiguous counties and states, some in-state residency for certain colleges. So you can look into that. And then a lot of times schools will have programs where they will waive the out-of-state rates for students, as a way to attract the students. So
Mhm.
there are schools that do that as well. So
Yep.
yeah, there are some options.
Yeah, right here in or right here in New England, University of Maine will offer your state costs and if you attend the University of Maine. So my son, if he was at all interested in going to Maine, which he is unfortunately not, could go to Maine and pay UMass tuition rates, despite the fact that obviously he it would be in Maine and he is not a Maine resident. So that's one I just know of off the top of my head.
Hmm. Yep.
Um, so what, talk just a little bit. So in what I will mention is that we have talked about tuition reciprocity agreements on shows in the past because there are a lot of nuances to those.
Yep.
So if people are interested, they could check the archives. And if you don't know which, how to find things in the archives, if you go to our blog.getintocollege.com. I got it. And you search the blog and you search for tuition reciprocity, it should pull up an overview of the podcast that we did, and it will give you the date that that aired, and you can then go to Voice America and look for it there. Anyway, but give us the basics of tuition reciprocity, please.
All right. Well, the one that I'm just most familiar with, I'll list all of them that I know of, but the one that I've worked with the most is just called the Western Undergraduate Exchange, and it is 15 Western states plus Guam and the Northern Marianas Islands, and their reciprocity. Not all schools in those states participate, and not all programs in every school participate. So
Right.
there's some hit and miss there, but essentially what it says is your student from your state can come to our state's in-state public schools, and instead of paying out-of-state prices, they will pay 150% of in-state prices.
Mhm.
So that can be, a pretty good discount.
Yep.
So if you live in any of those Western states, check that out. Western Undergraduate Exchange, WUE. There's the Academic Common Market, which is for the Southern states. So if you live in any of the Southern states, look at Academic Common Market. The Midwestern Student Exchange, if you had to guess where that one is, in the Midwest.
Yeah.
And the same for this one, the New England Regional Student Program for New England State. So check those out. They all participate differently. So you'll have to go and see individually where your state is, if they participate, and if so, how.
Right. And one of the things that I've noticed about a lot of them, although we can never make a blanket statement, is that often the flagship institution does not participate, right? So this is
Yeah,
not going to be the way you can go to the University of Michigan on the cheap.
very true.
They're not probably going to be part of it. Okay.
Very
How
true.
does that differ, tuition reciprocity, from the border waiver that you mentioned earlier?
Well, the border waiver could be based on like distance. If, let's say, there's a college that's right on the border of two states, then definitely the students in that state qualify. But
Hmm.
what if it's just separated by a river and like 3 miles away, you pay out of state rates at the, so there's a lot of states that will have some kind of agreement saying, if you are in this contiguous state, or in this contiguous county in this state, or if you're within a certain number of miles from the college itself, it could be 30 miles, or it varies by state, but they'll say instead, we will consider you, you will give you in-state rates because you're so close.
Right. And that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's making the wheels turn in my head and think, geez, we're right
Hmm.
on the border of Rhode Island. I wonder if,
Mm.
we would qualify for anything there. Yeah, so that's interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Um, what about maybe you've got a student who's a really great student, very strong grades, really good rigor, maybe doing some interesting things outside of the classroom. Are there often in-state options for those students at out-of-state schools?
Yes, they might not call it in-state rates, but essentially what they would do is waive the out of state. So, gosh, years ago when I did the podcast on net price calculators, I
Mm.
ran like 40 different net price calculators using all the same information to just kind of familiarize myself. And one of the schools that I picked was the University of South Carolina.
Mhm.
My sister graduated from there, and I used, my son's information as, he was a male student from New York with like a B average, not a great student, but a good student. And
Mhm.
and when I ran the net price calculator there, it essentially said waived out of state tuition. And I
Mm.
was thinking, wow, that was a surprise. I wasn't expecting that. And it might have been because, I mean, I didn't give him stellar grades in the net
Right.
price calculator, but it might have been for some kind of geographic diversity.
Right.
University of South Carolina pulls a lot from the Southeast, less so from the Northeast. So maybe they were thinking, well, it will offer this, student, in-state rates to see if we can entice them into enrolling.
Right. And become maybe a little bit more national in terms of the
Exactly.
student body represented on the campus. Yeah. I
Exactly.
mean, state schools in general are there to serve the residents of the state, but in some cases, they have more spots than there are in-state students, or they need those out-of-state students to pay the bills a little bit. And one of the ways in which they might get more attention from those all-important out-of-state students might be to start pulling some students in from those states where they don't see students by offering them discounts, right? So
Exactly.
interesting
Exactly.
stuff. Yeah.
Hmm.
Anything else or last minute thoughts about helping students to get in-state pricing at out-of-state institutions?
Well, they can look for legacy scholarships if they have a parent or someone in the family who graduated from a particular public school in a different state. See if that state offers any, or that school offers any legacy scholarships. Just regular merit scholarships at some schools are targeted to out-of-state students. And then also there are some very even for out-of-state rates. There are some public schools that have very low prices even for out of state tuition. So
Hmm.
just open up a search engine and type in, low out of state tuition, and you'll have a list of schools that, even if you don't get the in state rates, the out of state rates are very reasonable.
Right. Awesome. Tara, thank you so much for joining today. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
All right. Well, we are going to take another quick break. And when we come back, we're going to shift gears and we are going to talk about Ivy League applicants and some of the students we've seen be very competitive in Ivy League pools over the past couple of years. And that's because a lot of you have asked for it. So you ask, we aim to deliver. And we'll be right back.